Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for bearing with me. I know last week there were a couple of hiccups, but today I am beardless. There is no filter, and I am in a place where hopefully I will not lose any connectivity, and hopefully everyone who tried to get in last week was able to get in. I spoke with the office and I asked them to send out the proper link and the password. So I hope everyone is in, and together now we can spend the next hour finishing up a discussion of Dan, looking at the contours of Dan's double nachala. He is to a certain degree a firstborn, so he does get a certain doubling of an inheritance, even if it came about through a roundabout fashion. And also, as I had said, I'd like to spend some time today, much of our time actually, talking about this strange but essential pairing of the Ben Leah Yehuda with the Bechor Rachel Dan, and see how these two, who on the surface don't seem alike at all, are very often paired together throughout the history of Israel. Okay, so just for a very brief recap of what we spoke about last week, I spent most of my time talking about Donne's concept and his conception, where the circumstances in which Donne was born, and that he was brought into a certain, we saw, distressing situation on the part of Rachel, and how he bears then for the entirety of the development of the son of Jacob into a tribe, the imprint of Rachel's liminality. That's a word that I'm going to draw upon a lot because I think that that is the most apt word in describing Dan. There's four what I call liminal tribes, the tribes that are conceived of by the primary mothers, by Leah and Rachel, but they're not physically born to the primary mothers. They're forced into conception, as opposed to what would happen naturally between a husband and wife, in that Rachel gives Bilhah, her maidservant, to Yaakov to be built through Bilhah, and then Dan and Naphtali, the first of the two liminal tribes, are born. But Dan, being the first of the liminal tribes, bears most strongly that liminality. What do I mean when I say liminality? I mean lack of a sense of a strong sense of belonging, of somehow being in between. He is, on the one hand, I keep on stressing, and I'm sure there are those who can argue with me, that he is Rachel's firstborn, and for all intents and purposes considered Rachel's son. She considers him her son, her firstborn. But the verses and the sages and the development of the story of Israel do not let us forget that he is going to be greatly overshadowed by her real, let's say, biological firstborn, Yosef, and Ephraim primarily, the Bechor, the one who receives the primacy of Yosef, will overcome Dan. But he is imprinted with that liminality, and it's with that sense of, let's say, disenfranchisement, right? In that he was essentially the firstborn, but he never takes on really a firstborn role, that gives rise to the bitterness that we see throughout the tribal development, which reflects Rachel's state when he was born. And it is this kind of non-prime, but yet prime positioning of Dan, which I think comes into expression with another role that we see of the tribe. Again, Dan as a son of Yaakov doesn't really figure in the stories of Genesis. He's much more of a figure throughout the development of Israel. And as I spoke about last week, prime within that entire arc of development in the adolescent stage of Israel during the period of the Judges, where Samson, the golden boy of Dan, is the epitome of a shofet, of a judge, and epitomizes that the instability of Israel, and of course that makes sense given that Dan will always be the unstable, chafing at his position tribe. So here we have another aspect, which I didn't get to last week, but I'd like to pick up now, of the tribe of Dan. If last week, most of the time again was about his circumstance of his birth and Shimshon, now I'd like to speak about some other instances where we see Dan throughout the development of Israel in the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. So one place where we see Dan is as a specific role in the traveling of the tribes throughout the wilderness, where you have Yehuda, who leads the tribes. Yehuda is always going to be the vanguard and the leader. And we saw this when we were looking at Yehuda, not only leading the tribes throughout the wilderness, but also being charged with leading the tribes after the death of Yehoshua. But Dan is the opposite of Yehuda in this sense, in that he is what's called the rear guard. V'nasa degel machane b'nei Dan. B'nei Dan would travel last. Me'asef l'chal hamachanot l'tzivotam. They would be what we call the ma'asef. Even in modern Hebrew parlance, if you have a school group that's going out on a tiyul, then you have a designated ma'asef, the one who's going to be at the back, making sure that there are no stragglers, that nobody falls behind, and nobody falls out of line. It's an important role. It's the one who brings up the rear. It's also the most vulnerable role because you're the one who doesn't have a protection. Yehuda also vulnerable in that he's leading, but all of the rest of the children of Israel protected in a way by these two bookends of Yehuda and Dan, and that is why the sages will say that Amalek was able to attack Dan. That Dan was the most vulnerable because they were the stragglers, and that's also who Bilam identified as the potential target for
Sorry.
Balak.
So do you think that Asaph, who concluded the Sefer Tehillim, was called Asaph because he was Ma'aseh?
Maasif. I think that there's a strong likelihood that the idea of any name, including Chag HaAsif, which is what we call Sukkot, implies the end, implies the completion and the fullness. So yes, that's a cogent point. Chag HaAsif being when we gather in all of the grain that had been drying out throughout the summer into our storehouses in anticipation of the rains, the end of the harvest season. So yes, so he's the Me'asef here is an ending.
What do the commentators say about the word Ma'aseh here? Do they see it positively or
So
negatively?
let's look at how Rashi understands Ma'asef. Thank you for leading into source number 16. Ma'asef l'chal hamachanot. Talmud Yerushalmi, quoting, now again, and I'd like to stress this because I think it's such an important point. Rashi very, 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 very rarely is inventive. Of course, he's wildly inventive. He's wildly creative in his choice of Mamare Chazal. But he will, whenever you see an interpretation of Rashi or commentary of Rashi, unless it's a pshat, like a translation, it's almost always based on a rabbinical source. So here he's basing it on the Yerushalmi. Lefi shaya shivto shel Dan merubeh b'uchlusim, haya nosea ba'achrona. This is also, and I just brought this here, we also had seen this last week in Bereshit Rabbah Ayin Aleph, which was in the beginning of the sources I had brought. Dan was the last because he was just so weighed down with numbers. He had the most, and so it would be too cumbersome for him to have gone earlier. So if you were to ask me, do I think that there's a spin on this, positive or negative? I would say here it's somewhat, I guess, neutral, but also positive. Dan had one son, which is a name that's mentioned in the plural, Hushim. And so then one can say, well, having only one child, perhaps that means that he was not a numerous tribe. But here we see clearly that Dan was blessed with great numbers. And so it was just by dint of practicality that he had to go last. היה נוסע באחרונה, וכל מי שהיה מאבד דבר, היה מחזירו לו. He had this uncanny knack, one can say, or a penchant for tying up loose ends, right? For being able to make sure that nobody fell by the wayside. I love this language, which seems very innocuous, right? If anybody, let's say, I don't know, dropped a bag, then he would make sure to pick it up and return it to, someone from Naphtali dropped a bag, he'd return it. But I think here, and the way that I had put it when I was thinking more deeply about it and I was writing about it, was not so much Dun's ability to do Hashavat Avedah, to return missing objects, but was someone who could encourage those who wanted to kind of pull away to stay in the fold. Bear with me while I read to you a couple of lines, right? There's the Don is compared to a serpent, right? Lowly and oftentimes reviled. And a serpent knows what it's like to eat the dust. And Don too was very, he was never the one who was the got all of the kudos, let's say, and all of the positive encouragement or positive affirmation within the nation. And perhaps this was a necessary trait for a ma'asef, because their assignment was to keep people from falling too far behind. A ma'asef a ma'asef is the gatherer at the end, herded the stragglers and forgotten elements, encouraged them to remain in the fold, said to them, I'm with you, brother, in your loneliness. And yet I'm still part of this nation and you should be too. He absorbs everything and doesn't leave anything behind. So Dan will be a serpent on the path. That's the blessing that Jacob gives him. Perhaps not the glory tribe, but the one who most easily related to those who dawdled on the fringes, not really a part of things, right? Those who know what it's like to be down in the dust. And so he has that ability to make sure that others who are like him feel heard. The role of the ma'asef, I can say as a volunteer parent, it's kind of lonely. Like all the action is happening in the front and you don't really catch what's going on because you're in the back. So you kind of like are hovering on the fringes, but it's a necessary role. It's an important role because it maintains the integrity of the pack. And when you bring up the rear, then you ensure that the nation stays intact. So I think that there's something there that's very positive, although laden with a certain heaviness and sadness in that role of the Ma'asif, if I had to unpack that. Another circumstance in which we meet Dan is not only as the Ma'asif, but within the story in the book of Vayikra and Leviticus, we have these little vignettes that kind of come out of nowhere. And of course, this could be a shiur in and of itself, the shiur about the blasphemer, about the mekalel, the individual who curses, blasphemes God. But we don't have time to dwell on all of the details of the story. I bring this story because this blasphemer who is who goes out and blasphemes in the name of God and then is punished after Moshe asks how he should be treated. God says he should be removed from the camp and stoned. And who is this blasphemer? The verse tells us that he is connected to the tribe of Dan. So let's just look at the psukim together. Vayetze ben isha Yisraelit. There was a son of an Israelite woman, but who was also the son of an Egyptian man. There was some kind of an intermarriage there, an interrelationship between an Israelite woman, and an Egyptian man back during the enslavement in Egypt. Vayetzei betoch b'nei Yisrael, and he went out from the midst of Israel. Vayinatzu b'machaneh ben hayisraelit v'ish hayisraeli, and there was a vayinatzu there was a quarreling, there was a skirmish between this fellow, the son of the Israelite woman, and an Israelite man, another Israelite man. Now, this is a very heavy verse. It's a heavy verse because those of us who who try our hand the way that the sages do in intertextuality immediately say, "Whoa, we've heard these words before." Right? This is where the fun comes in. Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit and the Ish Mitzri and the Yinatsu. These are all words that we've heard in the book of Exodus. And in the opening of the book of Exodus, when Moses encounters an Ish Mitzri who's Makeh Ish Ivri, and there was quarreling within the camp. Between these same words appear. I didn't bring you the verse, and I don't, I think it's in the second chapter of Exodus, but it's the same exact words, which is obviously the sages pick up on. Let's leave that for a second. When we get to the Medrash, we'll see where they take that. Okay. Vayikov ben ha'isha ha'Yisraelit et Hashem vayikalel. Now, this fellow, this son of the Israelite woman, he says the ineffable name and then he curses it, and then they bring him to Moses. Now, this is where our purpose in talking about Shevet Dan comes in. V'shem imo Shlomit bat Divri lemated Dan. His mother, who up until now has not been named, she has just been Isha Yisraelit. Her name is given as Shlomit bat Divri from the tribe of Dan. So, without getting deeply now into the potential interpretation of mining her name for interpretive value, let's look at I just summarized the story, and now let's look at the midrash that's going to identify what's going on here subtextually. What is going on? What is causing this son of an Israelite woman to curse? Why is nobody being named? Why are we curious about the fact that he has an Egyptian father? Let's see what Vayikra Rabbah has to offer here. Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit. The son of an Israelite woman went out. Mehechan yatza. Where is he going out from? It's a curious turn of phrase. Where is he? What is he leaving? Tane Rabbi Chia mi parshat Yuchasin yatza. He was coming off of, or he was being left out of. There are different ways to read this. The issue of lineage, in that lineage was being discussed at that time, who belonged to which tribe, and this fellow was left out, or he was leaving outraged at the discussion, right? He was somehow separate from this discussion. Now, what does this mean? The Midrash goes on to expand. Shabalita ohalo b'machaneh Dan. This fellow sought to find his place in the tribe of Dan, in the encampment of Dan, because clearly his mother was from the tribe of Dan. Shemi Moshlomit bat Divri lemated Dan, right? His father was an Egyptian, and we know that here we're going to deal with sibuchim, with all kinds of complexities, because tribal affiliation is always by the father. And here we have an Israelite mother from Dan and an Egyptian father. Now, so he tries to find his place within the encampment of Dan. Amrulo, and the Danites say to him, what do you think you're doing? You don't belong here. You're not really of us. You're not really from Dan. Amar lahem, mibnot Dan ani, but I do have Danite lineage. My mother is a Danite. Amrulo, they said, whoa, but that's not how we determine tribal affiliation. Ish al diglo be'otot lebeit avotam, below lebeit imotam. The tribal affiliation is patrilineal, not matrilineal. Nichnas lebeit dino shel Moshe. He goes and asks Moshe for some clarity. Here I am in the encampment of Israel, and I don't have a place. V'yatsa mechuyav. This is why I love this play by Vayetze ben Isha Yisraeli. He's storming out of Moses' courtroom, or he's storming out of the encampment of Dan. He's not finding his place. He lost the case. V'yatsa mechuyav. He just was not going to be identified as a Danite. Amad vagidev. That is why he blasphemes. If you want to talk about the ultimate disenfranchised, liminal person in probably in the entire Bible, it would be the Mekalel. He is what we call a mamzer. He is it is a position. It is the most pitiful and the most sorrowful position to be in, which is that you don't belong and you can't find your way to belong. And and I see here that there is a even though done, the sages will look at this episode and say the Danites were too strict with him, that look what happens when you push away someone who seeks to belong. And we should not look at this as a positive story. We should learn a lesson from this and not be so quick to send away those who we don't think belong. It's still interesting to me that this entire story is happening within the crucible of the tribe of Dan. The tribe that itself is defined by its liminality is expressing the most liminal situation in the entirety of Tanakh. And you can say, well, perhaps they should have learned from their liminality and been accepting of this fellow. The reason, by the way, just to tie up the loose ends, I had started by saying, you see the intertextuality here with the verse in Exodus, is that the whole story in the rabbinic imagination is born from that episode of Moses going out of Pharaoh's palace and seeing an Egyptian man striking an Israelite man. And who is this Egyptian man? The Ish Mitzri, the Hu ben Ish Mitzri. The only other time we see an Ish Mitzri is again back in Exodus, and here in the case of the father of the Mekalel, the Egyptian man that is striking an Israelite man is the father of this blasphemer. Now, we know the mother is an Israelite. So the backstory that the sages produce for us is that the Egyptian man so desired this woman, Shlomit bat Divri, this Israelite woman, that and in the morning when her husband, her Danite husband, left for his slavery job that day, then the Egyptian overlord taskmaster came in and slept with Shlomit bat Divri, and the offspring of that union was this disenfranchised fellow who we see cropping up here in Vayikra. That whole story, though, one can say, well, where did the sages come up with that? It's because they have these beautifully potent, strong textual pins of the Ben Ish Mitzri and the Vayinatsu, and they strove together. This is the exact same language that connects these two stories so powerfully in a literary sense. So you can see where the midrash is coming from. For our purposes, this midrash dealing with the tribe of Dan further expresses how Dan is a troubled tribe on the outskirts, and even those who want to affiliate with Dan can't find their place within that affiliation. Now, the next few sources, let me take a little tea break here. The next few sources that I have deal with Another aspect of Dan that he got very strongly from his mother. So if everything I've expressed until now, one you can say does express Rachel, her liminal state in the family is most acute upon the birth of Dan, and it is somewhat softened upon his birth, but he's brought into the family because of her liminality, because she sensed that she has no place within this family until she bears a child for Jacob. But now I'd like to talk about another aspect of Rachel that finds expression most most strongly in Dan, although it definitely finds expression in her other sons as well. Um, and here I bring a very long story that I'm going to paraphrase for want of time. This is after Shimshon had featured in four huge chapters in the book of Judges. Again, Dan overshadows Judges very, very strongly through the character of Shimshon. But then afterwards, in the last five chapters of Judges, Dan appears again. And I think I mentioned this in last week's shiur. Dan is now on the hunt for a new tribal allotment. Here, I'm going to take us down to the map. I attached the map this time. Let's see, here we go. Okay, here is the tribal apportionment that Dan was granted. So if we look in the book of Joshua, then we see the description of the Nachalah of Dan, stretching from the coast, including the city of Yafo, and going all the way up through the Shvela, up through what we call Hare Yehuda over here. I'm not going to be hard and fast about this boundary because I think that it winds somewhat, but you can see it's kind of like sandwiched. If I talk generally about the tribe that Nachalah have done, it's sandwiched between the sons of Rachel and the sons of Leah, right? Dan is kind of, again, I see this as an expression of liminality. He's neither here nor there. In fact, one of the main cities of Dan in this region, which will sound familiar to you through the Samson stories, Sorah, which is Shimshon's home, was assigned both to Dan and to Yehuda. So Dan is very unhappy with his Nachalah because I say one reason, perhaps I'm conjecturing here, is that it's for a personality like Dan, a tribal personality like Dan, it's very, very difficult to constantly be in the shadow of the prime tribes of Ephraim and Yehuda, where Dan, Dan who is potent and strong and powerful, but can't find his place as easily as the firstborn of Yosef, not the firstborn, but the Bechor of Yosef, and essentially the Bechor of Leah, the prime son of Leah. But the way that the verses tell us in Joshua is that Dan was constantly being hammered by the Amorites, and we can also say we know by the Philistines, right? The Plishtim over here. Yehuda had retreated off to the mountainous region of his Nachalah. The Plishtim dominated the coast and the Shvela, and Dan also was hammered by the Philistines, the Plishtim, and the verses tell us by the Amorites. They could not find their comfort in their Nachalah, the way that the other Shvatim had managed. So, getting back to our story, here we go. There were five Danites who had traveled the length of Israel to find a new area that would suit them. They found on the very, very outskirts of the land of Israel, the tippy top north. For those who have visited Tel Dan, that's what I'm talking about. The city that would become the city of Dan after they conquered it, way, way, way up north. But on their way, on their way to Tel Dan, as I mentioned last week, they stopped in Beit Micha. Micha's let's say, house of love and prayer, right? His little shtibel, his collection of all kinds of idolatrous accoutrements, and that really caught the eye of these Danites. And the Danites had asked of the Levite who was serving Micha. This is all a paraphrase of the 18th chapter, first part of the 18th chapter of Judges, to ask of the oracle, to ask of the Trafim whether they're going to be successful, and Micha's prophets, Micha's Levi is like, sure, don't worry about it. You'll do fine. You want to conquer the land of Israel, you'll do fine, right? Halavai, we should all have that kind of mindset. Now, they went back to their tribesmen back in their Nachala, and they said, Yalla, it's time to go and conquer the city of Laish or the city of Leshem, all the way up north. They're one in the same city. On their way back with their tribe, with the warriors of their tribe, they stop again in Beit Micha, and they say, you know what? We're going on our way up. We want to take all of these idols with us, right? And they just went in and they took them. They took the sculptured image, the ephod, the oracle idols, the molten image, and the priest, meaning the Levite, is like, what are you doing? And they say to him, well, why don't you come too? And you can be our Kohen. Wouldn't you rather be a priest for a whole tribe than to be some little bit, serviceman for this one little shtibel, right? It's like a real promotion. And so this is what they do. They take all of these idols with them. And then here's the verse that I wanted to get to. Ve'akimu lehem b'nei Dan. After they conquered the city, they built for themselves, so they established the Pesel, this sculptured image that they had brought with them from the house of Micha. And the priest as well, Yehonatan ben Gershom ben Menashe Moshe, Hu banav hayu lekohanim l'shevet hadani. So this Levite they took up with them, he belonged to them now as their priest. But ad yom glot haaretz. This was not just some blip. This was not some aberration. This was their religion. You live all the way up there. You're very, very far from from Shiloh. You're very, very, very far from what's going to be Jerusalem, the center of the focus of our worship. They already established for themselves almost a separatist religion until the Assyrians came and exiled the 10 tribes in the 8th century in 732 and then 722 BCE. Up until that time, for hundreds of years, these idols stood. But since we're in the book of Judges, we stress that during the whole time that there was a tabernacle in Shiloh, there was also this competing worship center, cultic center up in Dan. Okay, so when it comes to Dan, there's a sense there of idolatry, right? Well, not even a sense; it's written befeirush, written very explicitly that they were idols, and I think that it's very fair to relate this back to Rachel's idolatry. She essentially brought idolatry with her from her father's house into the family of Yaakov. If you remember the story, and here I'm back in Breshit, the story is that Rachel had stolen. She, in the same language that we saw with the Danites stealing the idols of Micha, she too, Rachel ganavtam, she stole the gods or the idols, the images from her father's house. And Lavan went and accosted Yaakov for stealing these idols. Yaakov denies it, but he wasn't able. Lavan went and tried to find the idols, was not able to find them. And Rachel lakcha et hatrafim. Rachel had taken these trafim, but to simeim b'char hagamal bateshav alehem, she hid them. Right, it was important for her to take them. Right, and he didn't end up finding them. But the verses do retain for us the fact that Rachel held on to these idols. Now, some of the commentaries say she took them away because she wanted to wean her father away from idolatry. And so she took them with her. And then the follow-up question would be, well, why didn't she just, destroy them on the way? She was holding on to them. They would be discovered in when Yaakov enters into and the family enters into the land of Israel, and then they would be buried in Shechem. But she's still holding on to them, and we see this. I don't want to say penchant for idolatry, but I do want to say this behavior of of needing to seek out the future, of needing to hold on to these trafim. Trafim specifically are oracles, that which can tell the future, throughout her children. We see it as well with Benjamin, with Joseph, with Yosef and Benjamin, where Yosef has this divination cup, right? This gvia that he then plants in Benjamin's sack. I feel like I'm Joseph and his his Technicolor Dreamcoat, like it's running through my mind now, planting the cup in young Benjamin's sack. And what is this cup? The verses tell us clearly, "V'hu nachesh yinachesh bo." This is a divination cup. That whether or not Yosef used it, it was something that the text assigns to him, and then he planted within Binyamin's amtachat, his sack. And when the brothers hear of this, when they discover that this gvia, this divination cup, again, it's not some kind of a goblet that you drink out of. It's to do magic with. It's to worship with or to tell the future with. Then they find it in Binyamin's sack. Look at how the midrash ties all of this back to Rachel. וימצא הגביע באמתחת בנימין, כיוון שנמצא הגביע אמרו לו, מה גנבה bar ganavta. You're a thief, the son of a thief, and you're stealing all the same things, right? You can't leave this stuff alone. Not to mention that the whole story that I began with the Danites stealing these idolatrous accoutrements, were that they were stealing accoutrements from the worship house of an Ephraimite, of Micha Hephrati, Micha an Ephraimite, Ephraim from Rachel. All roads of idolatry lead back to Rachel. Yeravam ben Nevad as well. They not to say that the Judeans later on down the road were not guilty of idolatry, but idolatry is mostly found and is mostly rampant within the tribes of Rachel. And I'd like to expand on for a few minutes on this done aspect of things, because I've mentioned Yosef, I've mentioned Binyamin, I've mentioned Ephraim. For that matter, I could talk about Shaul, the first king of Israel, from Binyamin, seeking out the Baalat Ov in Endor, and his need to know what was going on through this idolatrous means. I will just expand on some midrashim that I did not bring, but trust me that they exist. Midrashic literature, if it focuses, if I've been saying that all of this goes back to Rachel, Midrashic literature is rife with other episodes and allusions to specifically Dan's idolatrous tendencies, systematically portraying this tribe in a very negative light. And not only because, again, the first time what we see this textually is in the book of Judges, when the warriors of Dan steal Micha's idols. But there are allusions to Dan's idolatrous inclinations even in the desert wanderings. And here I could go on and with different examples. I'll just name a few. There's a census that Yoav ben Tzruya, who was David HaMelech's general, he takes the census. He begins it with the tribe of Dan. which is odd because you never begin anything with Dan. You might want to end things with Dan, but why would you start counting Israel through the tribe of Dan? Well, because you know that taking a census is pasnished, right? Like it's totally prohibited. So so Yoav didn't want to carry out David's order, but David insisted that he carry it out. And so he started with Dan, hoping that if divine punishment is going to come for the sin, then take it out on Dan, right? Because they're the idolatrous tribe. And that's in Psikta Rabati. There's the wickedness of Dan is symbolized in his stone, in the Leshem. The Leshem is identified as an amber. Now, remember, when it comes to the stones, this is all broken down for us, right, by Rabbeinu Bechaye, who I think again 12th or 13th century, who goes into the characteristics or the energies, as it were, the powers of these stones, and he says that in this Leshem, you could see the inverted face of a man. Because, as Rabbeinu Bechaye says, the sinful Danites turned good into evil, hence the inverted face of their stone. This motif stretched as far as Christian legends, which identified the Antichrist as descending from Dan. And it goes, it of course is expressed over and over in the Midrash, as I had said, and I have a number of sources here. But I'll just end with one more source, with a very early Midrash, which is brought to us in Sanhedrin, but is in earlier sources as well, which is that when Avraham, we'll see that Avraham makes it up to Dan, the northern stretch of Dan, which doesn't exist yet, but what the verse there says that Avram chased the four kings up to the city of Dan when he was trying to rescue his nephew Lot, who was kidnapped by Kedar Laomer and the other three kings. And there is no Dan. So what is it? Why is the verse telling us that Avram chased them up to Dan? Because the verses in telling us where Abraham was at every juncture are telling us that because Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, something is going to happen in the future in these places. So Abraham is going to be there to have a premonition about what might happen and to pray on behalf of the success of his offspring. So in the case of coming up to Dan, he had the Gemara says he has an ominous premonition about all of the idolatry that's going to be linked with Dan. And so he would give an extra prayer there, as it were, to offset all of the evil that is coming from Dan. A couple of lines, permit me, please, and then we'll move along. Dan's permanent liminality and loneliness were the roots, perhaps, of their attraction to idolatry. I'd like to see a very strong connection here. It's not just that Rachel was an idolater, so therefore her firstborn is an idolater. It's because of his circumstance. Like Dan's semi-mother Rachel at the time of his birth, Dan's namesake tribe did not find its place. They flitted alone on the fringes, contributing to Bnei Yisrael, but without forming their essential bulk. Remember as well that they moved away from the center to the outskirts, to the fringes. His character represented that suspended stage of Rachel when she was still barren and unfulfilled, still distant from the rest of the family. There's going to be the refined version of Rachel when we get to Yosef, but this is the more wild, unrefined, darker version of Rachel, who could not leave her family idols. Okay. Now, I want to, in the time that we have left, I want to just, before I even get to Dan and Yehuda, because I don't know if we'll have time to get to that particular pairing, let me just read these few lines. Dan presented startling contrasts that at once attracted and repelled. To him belonged raw power and tremendous self-reliance. Here I'm basing my thoughts on a reflection of Shimshon. But dangerous vulnerability and isolationist disquiet menace those strengths. Though we have much to root for, Yaakov saw in Dan the Mashiach. Though we have much to root for, he consistently succumbed to his flaws. Although he was part of the nation, it remains admittedly hard to embrace the serpent. But include him we must, and the best way to achieve that is by celebrating the promise and potential that will be his birthright forever. He is not a minor tribe. He is counted among the major tribes, the first of the liminal tribes, extremely potent, extremely powerful, but also extremely flawed. Let us believe that one day Dan will emerge as the leader that we all yearn for, and this is where I hope to have gotten to today when we discuss Dan and Yehuda. And let us echo the cry of Yaakov, Lishuatcha kiviti Hashem. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk about the redemption of Dan. By the way, redemption of Dan, just look at what's going on in Tel Aviv, in Gush Dan, right? Dan is I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but I can't help it because I get so excited when I think about this. Yehuda is Yerushalayim and Dan is Tel Aviv. And I'll let that sit with you, hoping to develop that if we have some time at the end. But first, the tour guide in me is not allowing me to leave off a very quick tour of Tel Dan. Tel Dan is a must-see. For those who haven't seen it, I encourage you all to in your next trip to Israel or your next time that you're going up to the north, and Baruch Hashem, now that we have access once again to our northernmost reaches, here you see Dan all the way up north, on the outskirts of his brother Naphtali's Nachala. This is where he reestablished himself, the tribe of Dan, and specifically in the city of Dan. And Tel Dan, most people go to Tel Dan because you have this nice river and you can walk along the river, and that's lovely. But if you were to go with me to Tel Dan, we wouldn't even be seeing the river. We'd be going straight to the following sites. And it's really a crying shame for me to do this in 2 minutes because it deserves hours and hours. But I just want to give you a taste in some of the highlights of the magnificent Tel that is Tel Dan. First and foremost, because it has one of the wonders of the ancient world intact in Tel Dan. And this is the 18th century Canaanite gate, which you see is made out of mud brick. Here you can see intact the arch. I'm pointing it out with my mouse. Everything you see here is a shichzor, is a renovation, but here are the original fired mud bricks and the steps leading up to the Canaanite gate. Now, those who are well-traveled in Israel are used to massive Canaanite fortifications in Gezer, in Megiddo, in Chatzor, in Ir David. You see these gorgeous, huge 18th, 17th century fortifications. But the reason why I particularly love this one is the intact arch. And also because of its correlation to the patriarch story. We never seek the patriarchs in that archaeological record because you're talking about individuals. You're not talking about a nation, right? Where are you going to find Abraham in the archaeological record? Where are you going to find Yaakov in the archaeological record? So I had mentioned earlier that Abraham was chasing Kedar Omer and the three other kings of the Assyrian region of the stretches of Mesopotamia up to the northeast, and he chased them up to Dan. וישבע אברהם כי נשבע אחי, וירק את חניכיו וילדי ביתו 18,300 וירדוף עד Dan. He gathers together his 318 men and he pursues them as far as Dan. This is what, I remember sitting in my in some undergrad classes in archaeology and Bible, and this is pointed out as one of the many anachronisms, right? How can we talk about Dan in the Genesis story? But of course we can talk about Dan in the Genesis story. It doesn't exist yet. Dan only gets its name, this Dan up here, only gets its name in Joshua and Judges, when the story is told and then retold about how the tribe of Dan goes up and conquers Leshem or Laish, depending on which version you're looking at, Joshua or Judges, and then renames the city Dan. So what is Abraham doing, chasing Kedar Omer up to Dan? Well, as I explained earlier, in the mindset of Chazal, the reason why Dan is mentioned here is that Abraham is whether it's a premonition, a conscious premonition or not, he's being linked into, he's being woven into this later story of his great grandson and his great grandson's tribe that will have so many, will pose such a threat to Israel up in this region of Dan when they build their temple with all of Micha's idols in it. But why do I bring that verse here? Because if Abraham was up in that city, whether it was called Leshem or Laish or some other name that preceded the Phoenician city of Leshem or Laish, this would have been the gate that he would have encountered. That this is the time period from the 18th and 17th century, the Middle Bronze Age, where if we're going to date the patriarchs to any period, it would be that period. And so there was a city there, and this is what he perhaps would have passed right by or would have seen. So I like bringing that reference because we do have Dan in the age of the patriarchs in the Middle Bronze Age. Now, taking us down to the crux of Dan, when Dan becomes Dan, when Tel Dan, the city up here, becomes the city of Dan after it's conquered by the Danites in the Iron One period. We're talking about let's say the 12th or 11th century BCE. The archaeological record strongly accords with a violent destruction of a city. So it accords with the narrative as we have it in both Joshua and Judges, where the city would have been destroyed by the Israelites and the Israelites would have resettled it. Because in the archaeological record, an Israelite house, an Israelite cooking pot, and an Israelite temple would look different than a Canaanite house, cooking pot, or temple. And this is how we can tell, not only through the destruction layer, but through then the rebuilding layer, who then settled in that destroyed city, therefore surmising who destroyed the city. So again, not wearing my Tanakh cap, but wearing my archaeology cap, I would point us to the plethora of collared rim jars. This is just a sampling that were discovered in Tel Dan that attest to an Israelite settlement in the Iron Age, a destruction layer where the city was totally destroyed and then rebuilt as an Israelite settlement. The story of Dan is heavily, heavily correlated with the archaeological evidence. Prime among that would be the temple complex. Here I bring a poor picture. And the reason why I'm bringing a poor picture is to encourage everyone to go there on their own. Because you're going to say, this picture is just not doing it for me. And it shouldn't do it for you. You need to go there and see for yourself the temple complex that the Danites built in their renovation of their city, which again they renamed Dan. And then this same complex would have been adopted and expanded and renovated centuries on by the first king of Israel, Yeravam ben Nevat, who was the king that wrested, or the leader that wrested power away from the son of Shlomo HaMelech and divided the kingdom into the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, and the southern kingdom. And the verses tell us in the book of Kings that he put a golden calf in Dan. Well, of course he did, because the infrastructure was already there, right? You never want to have to build from scratch. There was an idolatrous infrastructure in place in Dan, so he just followed that up with more cultic accoutrements, in this case, a golden calf. He made one in the northernmost reaches of his kingdom, up here in Dan, and one he settled down here in Beit El. Here's Beit El, right over here. Yes, to demarcate his kingdom, and also to make it easy for people to go and worship, and to give them an alternative to going down to worship here in Jerusalem. Finally, the last little gem that I want to bring, again, hoping just to whet your appetites to come and see it for yourself, is this marvelous piece of extra biblical evidence that is now, it's either in the Israel Museum or it's still in the Hebrew Union College Skirball Museum in Jerusalem. because the site was excavated by Hebrew Union College. This is the Beit David stela, which was a stela that was commissioned by the Aramean king Hazael, who comes up again and again in the biblical record. All of the kings of Aram are called Hazael, so we're not sure exactly which Hazael this was, but in reading here the Ktav Ivri, the ancient Hebrew script, which was also ancient Aramean. They shared a script. Then you can see highlighted here is Beit David. So here we have the oldest and earliest attestation of the kingdom of David on a stela that was discovered in Tel Dan, commissioned by an Aramean king who's talking about the destruction of Beit David or his triumph over Beit David. But still, that the name Beit David occurs in this 9th century BCE context. For those who like to late date, as I say, push all of the dating way later, then this puts that to bed, that puts that to lie, that Beit David is clearly an entity by the 9th century BCE. Okay, so now we have just 4 minutes left before I take any questions to talk very, very briefly about what it is I had wanted to spend most of my time today on, which is Dan and Yehuda. Let me just get to where I am. Okay. So Dan and Yehuda are two tribes that represent two different streams, two different mothers, and two different modalities of leadership. Yehuda, one can say, is the traditional royalty David leader. Dan is the unconventional, wild, unpredictable, powerful, potent leader Shimshon. Now, the way because I don't have time to talk about the interplay of these two tribes, suffice it to say that they come up again and again and again, textually and conceptually, as linked, as powerful. I'll just give you one example. Jacob blesses Yehuda, Gur Aryeh Yehuda, that Yehuda is a lion club, and then Moses blesses Dan Gur Aryeh. Dan is a lion cub as well. By the way, I always love when this happens, and it happens sometimes, that's somehow embedded in the blessings of either Jacob or Moses is an allusion to the nachalot, to the territorial contours. Dan Gur Aryeh Yizanek min Habashan. Dan is a lion's cub leaping forth from the Bashan. The Bashan is the northern area that we now mostly associate with the Golan. So the upward stretch. Why would Dan, whose Nachala is down here, be called Yizanek min Habashan, if there wasn't some kind of an allusion here to what would happen in the future with Dan's claim of this outermost region? Getting back to Dan and Yehuda, I'll say the following. Dan and Yehuda represent for all time two streams within Israel, just like Yehuda and Ephraim represent two streams within Israel. Dan and Yehuda do as well. They partner in the building of the Mishkan. They partner in the building of the Mikdash. They have to, this is all, I don't have time to right now to expand on this, but this is all played out in the biblical verses themselves, where these two tribes are singled out as having to partner to build edifices of holiness within Israel. Now, the reason why this is, I think, is extremely urgent and relevant to our days and to the enterprise of rebuilding modern Israel. And that is because we need the legacy, the monarchy, the royalty, the tradition of Yehuda that is centered around Jerusalem. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. We need all of that tradition, all of our religion, our traditions to define who we are. Hand in hand with that, we need the energy, the creativity, the counterculture, the new and mutated wildness that is housed in contemporary Dan, in Gush Dan, call it Greater Tel Aviv, if you will, that must bring that energy into Am Yisrael. We are an old new nation with old new energies, and this old new tension has taken on an old new form. That we are now, and I see this in my Israeli children, discovering a new emergent fusion of Yehuda and Dan, which is marvelous. And I know I'm talking almost in code, but I think that I've spent enough time on Dan that you can take that into what I intend here, which is that I do believe that the future of Israel and the diaspora as well, with its energies and its ingathering energies, is going to once again represent this fusion of the royalty of Yehuda with the potency of Dan, and in the most marvelous, interesting, and wild ways. And so I'll leave it with that, and I will take any questions now. Let me get to, here we go. Okay, let's see. Speaking of Maasef, I've always been curious as to whether the majority of Israeli guys named Asaf are named as such after a male forebear named Yosef or Asaf. I don't know. I don't know what Yosef must be connected in some sense to, to that, but I know that there's a biblical name Asaf as well, as was pointed out. The territory of Dan in central Israel, roughly but not exactly, follows the path of the modern highway that connects Tel Aviv with Yerushalayim. Yes, true. But it also is Tel Aviv. Gush Dan is Tel Aviv. Even the Dan bus lines, the Tel Aviv bus lines, carry that name. And so when we talk colloquially about Gush Dan, we're not even talking about the prosdor linking the two. We're talking about Dan, which I think is there's such poetic justice here to our contemporary Gush Dan. Shaul's daughter Michal had Terafim, yes, absolutely, carrying on that strong tradition from her great-great-great-great-grandmother. Rachel remains dark and on the edges of the family as she dies young. She doesn't see the development of her own children. She too is really not a participant in the life of the tribes of Israel. Thank you. That is a brilliant insight. Thank you. She does strongly represent that. Oh, I have it here in Reb Adin Steinsaltz Zatzal. She represents expectation. She represents dreams and aspirations. However, she remains forever expectant, forever awaiting fulfillment. This is just echoing what Ruthie had said. Both personally and symbolically, she is perhaps one of the most poignant expressions of the person who has everything and yet remains lacking. Even when Rachel's dreams were realized, it was not in her lifetime. The hope, the potential remained always suspended between what might have been and what might yet come to be. In the gorgeous words of Rav Steinsaltz, I think that's also a reflection of Dan, of what might have been and what might yet come to be, which is why Yaakov screams out, Lishuatcha kiviti Hashem, after seeing the fall of who he perceived to be Messiah. An altar with steps instead of a ramp and horns on the corners. You're talking about, you must be talking about Dan. Yes, that I'm not sure as to whether the reconstruction that they did here, the steps are legitimate. That is accurate. And horns on the corners, absolutely. The horns on the corners. I remember once going on a tour. I don't remember who took me to places in the Shomron with 4 horned altars that were from the time of way before this time even. This was from, because this 4-horned altar is dated to Yeravam. It's not dated, there was no altar that was found that is dated to the to the earlier period of when the tribe of Dan would have established their cultic center here. But given the different levels of this cultic center, know that of the archaeology, of the strata, know that earlier levels of a cultic center were discovered that date to the period of Shoftim. And what we're seeing here is Yeravam ben Nevat's and later generations of Israelite kings, cultic temple to their golden calf and any other idols they might have introduced in. And yes, the four-horned altar, strong symbol throughout all of these, this entire period from Yehoshua on through the destruction of the first temple. Interesting to see on the map that modern Tel Aviv proper is the southwesternmost part of the territory of Menashe, and modern Haifa is the northwestern most part of that territory. I want to just take plus the Sharon, right? Because Tel Aviv proper isn't hitting Menashe. Right. Right. You know what? I have to be honest with you. I don't really like what I did here. I'm just responding to your comments. I don't like how I designed Menashe, and the book is coming out in Hebrew, and I'm changing the map because I don't think this is entirely accurate. I have to change it slightly. So on that, I messed up, I have to say, on that point. Oh, I'm glad to charge you up. Charge me up too. I hope you come and see, and we can all go up to Tel Dan together. That would be really, really, yes. Some rabbis have identified Ethiopian Jews as being from Dan, and there's that also there's a self-identification. I don't know anything about that. There are people who specialize in what happened to the tribes after they were exiled, and where do, like the B'nai Menashe, for instance, from India, right? I think that they see that they trace themselves back to Menashe, and some Ethiopian Jews or some traditions within Ethiopian Jews trace themselves back to Dan. And Yosef, yes, you said, my pleasure, Varda, that at least the Sharon region is part of Menashe and not Dan. Yes, that's true. That's true. Dan being, again, I'm just stressing here, stuck in between. And I'll end, even though I'm happy to take any more questions, I'll end with that comment I had made when I gave that virtual tour of Reuven, Gad, Menashe, and Dan, right? All of the firstborns and all of the disenfranchised, never getting what is due to them. So they all have to run away to the outskirts of the nation. Poor Dan here, having to be faced all the time by your younger brothers, or by other tribes that are overshadowing you. And so I think that must be part of the reason that he was chafing at the constrictions of his nachala. Yes. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hi.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Amazing class.
I did want to mention one thing. I am giving a shiur for Matan on Thursday on Yehuda and Dan. So that which I wasn't able to mention here in this year probably will be recorded there. So it'll be a very, very deep expansion of this tension that I was talking about, and the cooperation also, by the way, that I'm talking about between Yehuda and Dan.
One other thing, thank you. I love this shiurim; they're amazing. But Bezalel and Aholiav were the ones
Yes.
who built the Mishkan. So that was, and they always say here you have the Yehuda and the Dan together. Rashi also
Absolutely,
says.
absolutely. Yehuda and Dan are, not only through Gur Aryeh, Yehudan, Dan Gur Aryeh, but also Bezalel and Aholiav. Also in the building of the Beit Hamikdash, you have Shlomo from Yehuda pairing with Hiram from Shevet Dan. Now Hiram we know of as the king of Tzur, but he sent a Danite to, and there's, it's not so clear in the text, but if you compare Sefer Malachim with Divrei Hayamim and add in Mesechet Arachin, then you get a picture of Dan being roped into that Kedusha building enterprise as well. So we have to have both of them in order to have success here.
Right. Thank you. Wonderful, wonderful shiurim. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful talk.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Tamar?
Thank you. Yes.
Did you also mention, I might have missed it, did you also mention the fact that Rachel's burial place is on the outskirts? That's another indication of her
Nachon.
being
She's always on the way.
the
She's
derech
like, you know, also
hafratzon.
Dun is also described al haderech, al ha, you know, he can't get comfortable.
Right.
I'm obsessed with Shimshon. I wish I had the ability, you know, you should know, I'm giving another shir on Shimshon. That's why he's also front of my mind on Wednesday. And he is Zev Jabotinsky. Most of you probably already know this, but I did not know this. He wrote a novel about Shimshon in 1926. And it was, he saw Shimshon as like the expression of the emergent Yishuv, right? Of like what would be. Now Jabotinsky, the visionary, right? Like he was of the Beitar movement. He was the you know the mentor of Menachem Begin, and like he saw this. We're all fascinated by the power of Dan and Shimshon and how he can't find his place, but it's that discomfort that I think so grabbed Jabotinsky and caused him to write a novel, beautiful novel. I read it all in one sitting. Very easy read. So anyway,
Excuse me,
Yes.
how do we access the Matan talk on Thursday, and what time is it?
the Matan Shir on both of them Wednesday and Thursday are at 11:30 or 11:45 to 1. And I think through Matan's office, but yeah, I think by Matan Yerushalayim through their office.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, my pleasure. My pleasure. It was a pleasure as always. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Tamar.
Next week, Yisachar. No, next week, Naphtali. Next week, Naphtali. Okay. Be well.
Thank you.